If the word selling makes you a little uncomfortable, you're in good company. Most photographers got into this because they love photography, not because they love sales. But here's the thing. If you have a business, selling is part of it, and the awkwardness you feel around it is almost always fixable. Once you understand where it actually comes from, that's what this video is about. Let's start by naming something honestly. The discomfort most photographers feel around selling is not a personality flaw. It's not because you're an introvert. It's not because you're not assertive enough. It's not because you're missing some sales gene that other people were born with. It usually comes from one of three places, and understanding which one is yours changes everything about what you actually need to work on. The first place is a misunderstanding of what selling actually is. Most photographers associate selling with pressure, with convincing someone to do something they don't really want to do, with being pushy, with manipulation, with that specific feeling you get when someone won't leave you alone at a car dealership. And if that's what selling means to you, of course it feels awful. Nobody wants to be that person, especially not someone who went into photography because they care about people and connection and making something meaningful. But here's the thing. That version of selling, high pressure, manipulative, coercive, that's not what you need to do. And it's not what works for the kind of business most photographers are building. Selling, at its most basic level, is helping someone understand whether what you offer is right for them. That's it. When you shift from, I need to convince this person to, I need to help this person understand what I do, the whole dynamic changes. You're not performing, you're informing. And informing is something you can do without feeling gross about it. The second place the awkwardness comes from is uncertainty about the offer itself. And this one is more common than people realize. When you're not totally sure what you're selling, it's really hard to talk about it confidently. If your pricing is fuzzy, if your packages aren't clearly defined, if you're not sure exactly what the client is getting, that uncertainty leaks into every conversation. And it feels awkward because it is awkward. You're trying to communicate something that isn't clear yet, that's uncomfortable for you, and confusing for the client. The fix isn't learning better sales techniques, it's clarifying what you're actually offering. When the offer is clear, talking about it becomes much easier. Not because you got better at sales, because you got clearer on what you're selling. The third place is fear of rejection. And this one is real. Rejection feels personal when you're the creative person behind the work. You put yourself into your photography, you care about it. So when someone says, that's more than I was hoping to spend, it doesn't always register as a budget issue. It registers as they don't value what I do, or they don't see it, or I'm not worth it. That's painful. And it makes sense that you'd want to avoid situations where that feeling could come up. But here's the reframe. A client saying no to your rate is not a critique of your talent. It's a mismatch between your offer and their budget. Those are genuinely different things, and not every mismatch is fixable or worth fixing. The right clients will say yes. The wrong ones will say no. That's not failure, that's filtering. And filtering is healthy. A business that books everyone is not necessarily a healthy business. A business that consistently books the right people is. Now I want to add something to this that doesn't get said enough. There's a fourth source of sales awkwardness that sits underneath the other three. And it's this. Most photographers were never taught how to have a business conversation. Photography education is almost entirely about the craft. Settings, lighting, posing, editing. Very little of it addresses how to talk about money, how to respond to an inquiry, how to explain your rates without feeling defensive, how to handle the question of can you do it cheaper. So when those conversations happen, and they will happen, you're improvising. And improvising in high-stakes moments creates anxiety, not because you're bad at it, because you've never practiced it. This is something that can be learned. It just requires someone actually teaching it in a practical way. Not theory, real conversations, real language, real situations. Let me pause here and ask you something. Think about the last time you had a pricing conversation that felt uncomfortable. Which of these was underneath it? Was it a misunderstanding of what selling is? Was it uncertainty about your offer? Was it fear of rejection? Or was it simply that nobody ever taught you how to have that conversation? Comment below if you're willing to share, because identifying the root of your specific discomfort is the first step toward fixing it. In the next section, we're going to talk about how to make these conversations feel more natural without becoming someone you're not. Once you understand where the awkwardness comes from, you can start addressing it directly. Let's talk about some practical shifts that make a real difference. The first shift is moving from convincing to clarifying. Your job in a sales conversation is not to talk someone into booking you. Your job is to give them the information they need to make a good decision. That means being clear about what you offer, clear about what the process looks like, clear about what the investment is, and then letting them decide. When you approach it that way, the pressure disappears. Because you're not trying to win, you're trying to help them understand. That's a much more comfortable role, especially for photographers who are naturally more about connection than competition. The second shift is getting your offer clear before you start having conversations. We talked about this in the last video, and it connects directly here. You should be able to describe what you offer in 2 or 3 sentences. What it is, who it's for, what the client gets, what it costs. If you can't do that concisely, you don't have a clear offer yet. And unclear offers create awkward conversations, not because you're bad at communicating, because you're trying to explain something that isn't defined. Definition comes first, communication comes second. The third shift is having a process for inquiries. This is one of the most underrated things in photography business. When someone reaches out, what happens next? If the answer is, I figure it out as I go, that's where a lot of communication anxiety comes from. You're making it up in real time. Under pressure, with someone waiting on the other end. A simple, repeatable inquiry process removes that. You know what to say. You know what to ask. You know what information you need before you can give a quote. You know what comes next. When the process is defined, the conversation feels less like a performance and more like a sequence. And sequences are calming. The fourth shift is learning to be comfortable with silence. A lot of sales awkwardness comes from filling silence with backpedaling. You state your rate. There's a pause, and immediately you start talking, offering alternatives, explaining why you charge that, mentioning that you might be able to work something out. That reaction, that impulse to fill the silence, signals uncertainty, and clients notice it. When you state your rate and then just wait, you're communicating confidence. Even if you don't feel it yet, the silence isn't empty. It's just the other person thinking. Let them think. The fifth shift, second success. And this is the one that makes the biggest long-term difference, is reframing what rejection actually means. Not every inquiry will turn into a booking. Not every booking inquiry is the right fit. And that's okay. When someone says that's out of my budget and moves on, the question isn't, what did I do wrong? The question is, was this the right client for my business? If the answer is no, then you didn't lose a client. You just efficiently determined a mismatch. That's not failure. That's good filtering, and the faster you can get comfortable with that reframe, the less charged every sales conversation becomes. Let me pause and reframe something bigger here. Sales isn't about getting everyone to say yes. It's about helping the right people say yes, and making it easy for the wrong people to self-select out. When you operate from that mindset, sales pressure almost completely disappears, because you're not trying to win every conversation. You're just having clear ones, and clear conversations are much easier to have than winning ones. Now let me add something practical here. One of the most useful things you can do is write out responses to the most common sales conversations in advance. Not scripts you read word for word, but language you've thought through. What do you say when someone asks why you charge what you charge? What do you say when someone asks if you can do it cheaper? What do you say when someone ghosts after you send your rate? When you've thought through those conversations ahead of time, you're not improvising. You have language available, and having language available reduces anxiety enormously. This is the kind of thing that sounds simple, but makes a real difference in day-to-day practice. In the final section, we're going to talk about the bigger picture, what happens to selling when the rest of your business gets clearer. Here's something I've noticed over years of working with photographers. The ones who feel most comfortable in sales conversations are almost never the ones who studied sales techniques the hardest. They're the ones whose business is the most clearly defined. They know what they offer, they know who it's for, they know what it costs and why. They have a process that works, they've delivered consistently enough to trust themselves. When all of that is in place, selling doesn't feel like selling. It feels like a conversation. And that's the goal, not to become a better salesperson, to become a clearer photographer with a clearer business. There's a version of this that I want to describe because I think it helps to have a picture of what you're actually building toward. Imagine a photographer who gets an inquiry. They have a simple, clear response ready. They explain their offer concisely. They state the investment without apologizing for it. If the client has questions, they answer them clearly. If the client books, great. If they don't, that's okay too. The whole thing feels like a normal conversation, not a performance, not a negotiation, not a test of whether they're good enough, just an exchange of information between two people figuring out if they're a good fit. That's not a fantasy. That's what happens when the underlying clarity is in place, and the underlying clarity is buildable. Now here's where I want to be real with you about something. Building that clarity takes time. It requires actually sitting down and defining your offer, working through your pricing with intention, creating a simple process for inquiries, practicing the language until it feels natural. That's work. And it's work that most photographers are doing alone. Without feedback, without someone to tell them when their offer is confusing or their pricing explanation is undermining their confidence. That's where things move slowly. Not because the photographer isn't capable, but because it's genuinely hard to see your own blind spots. Let me do the reflective beat here. Think about an area of your business that feels unclear right now. Pricing, your offer, your process, your communication. Notice that whatever came to mind, that's probably where your sales discomfort is rooted. Because when things are clear, conversations get easier. When things are fuzzy, conversations feel like improvisation. Improvisation is exhausting, and it's also inconsistent. Some days it goes okay, other days it falls apart. That inconsistency makes it hard to build confidence. Because you can't tell if the good conversations happened because of something you did or just because that particular client was easy. Structure and clarity make your sales conversations more consistent, and consistent results build confidence faster than anything else. This is one of the places where working with someone directly makes a real difference. Not a course where you watch someone else's example. A real conversation about your real business, your specific offer, your specific pricing hesitations, your specific communication stumbling blocks. When someone who has been through this can look at what you're doing and say, here's what's working and here's what's getting in your way, things shift faster. That's what mentoring is actually for, not teaching you things you could find on YouTube, helping you see clearly what's specific to you. If you're at that stage, you have some experience, you're tired of the awkwardness, and you want someone to help you sort out the underlying stuff. The 5-lesson mentoring plan is designed for exactly that. We work through the practical questions, your offer, your pricing, your process, your communication, in the context of your actual business, not someone else's. You can find all the details at savvyshutterbug.com. Let's close with something simple. Selling doesn't have to feel manipulative or pushy. It can feel like a natural extension of being clear about what you do and who you serve. The awkwardness isn't permanent, and it's not a character flaw. It's a gap in clarity. And clarity is something you can build. Build the offer. Build the process. Practice the language. And let the selling get easier as everything underneath it gets cleaner. Subscribe if you're following along. Next week, we're building your first simple photography offer. Your concrete, practical, something you can actually use. I'll see you then.